The morning sun poured its soft golden light across the busy airport, casting long shadows over the polished floors. Travelers hurried through the terminal, dragging wheeled suitcases behind them, clutching coffee cups, and glancing nervously at departure boards. Among them was Marcus Bennett, a tall, calm man with thoughtful eyes. He wasn't an ordinary passenger. Beneath his composed appearance, Marcus carried a responsibility that very few people around him could guess. He was an air marshal on duty that day. Marcus blended easily into the crowd. Dressed in a tailored gray suit with a navy tie, he looked like a businessman heading to an important meeting. He carried a leather satchel instead of a flashy briefcase, and his steps were steady, unhurried. Nothing about him revealed his real purpose: to keep the flight safe and watch over the passengers without anyone ever realizing it. At the gate, the boarding announcement called for first-class passengers. Marcus stood, offered a polite smile to the boarding agent, and walked forward. The agent scanned his ticket and nodded with professional courtesy. He stepped onto the jet bridge, his mind already running through the quiet checklist that had become second nature: entrances, exits, passenger behavior, crew interaction. Inside the aircraft, the cabin smelled faintly of leather and fresh coffee. The wide seats in first class gleamed under the soft overhead lighting. Marcus found his assigned seat, a window spot near the front, and placed his bag neatly in the overhead bin. He sat down, fastening his belt with the practiced calm of someone used to long hours of travel. To most people, Marcus looked like a man who simply belonged there. But to one passenger walking down the aisle, his presence in that seat seemed to raise an invisible question. Victoria Hale, a woman in her late 40s with diamond earrings and a designer scarf, slowed her steps as she reached the row. She had the air of someone used to being noticed, used to being given what she wanted without question. Her heels clicked against the carpet as she stopped next to Marcus's row. She tilted her head, looking at him with a puzzled expression, as though she had walked into a room and found something misplaced. "Excuse me," she said to the flight attendant nearby, her voice clear and sharp. "There must be a mistake." The attendant, a young woman with a warm smile, glanced at the boarding pass in Victoria's hand. "No mistake, ma'am. You're in seat 2B, right here next to him." Victoria's eyes flicked back toward Marcus, who had already opened a book and was calmly flipping through the pages. He didn't look up, didn't react to her tone. That only seemed to deepen her surprise. She gave a small laugh, as if the situation were slightly amusing to her but also unacceptable. "Oh, I see," she murmured, lowering herself into the seat beside him. She placed her expensive handbag on her lap and arranged her scarf carefully, sneaking another glance at Marcus. He simply continued reading, his face relaxed, his focus steady. For a few moments, silence filled the space between them. The hum of passengers settling in and the faint crackle of announcements floated through the cabin. Victoria adjusted her seat belt, crossed her legs, and pulled out her phone. But her attention kept drifting back to Marcus. Something about his quiet composure unsettled her. She leaned slightly toward the flight attendant again. "Are you absolutely certain?" she asked softly, her words carrying a weight of disbelief. "This seat, he's supposed to be here." The attendant smiled again, her professionalism unshaken. "Yes, ma'am. All seats are correctly assigned. He's exactly where he's supposed to be." Victoria nodded stiffly, though her lips pressed into a thin line. She muttered something under her breath, turning back to her phone. The screen's glow reflected in her eyes, but she wasn't really reading. She was thinking, measuring, quietly questioning what she had just been told. Marcus noticed her sideways glances but remained still. He had been in situations like this before. His training had taught him to let words and looks pass without reaction. Calm was his armor. Instead of responding, he turned another page of his book and let the silence shield him. As the rest of the passengers boarded, the energy in the cabin grew busier. Luggage thudded into overhead bins, voices overlapped, children laughed and fussed. But in row 2, the air was different, charged, uneasy, as though an invisible line had been drawn between two worlds sitting side by side. The captain's voice soon echoed over the speaker, welcoming everyone aboard, reminding them of their destination and flight time. Marcus closed his book briefly and gazed out the window. The runway stretched wide, promising another smooth journey. Yet he also knew that on any flight, calm skies could shift in a heartbeat. His role was to be ready, watchful, prepared for whatever came next. Meanwhile, Victoria tapped her nails against the armrest, each click sharp and deliberate. Her thoughts tumbled: how unusual this was, how curious, how unexpected. She told herself it didn't make sense. She couldn't understand why a man like him, calm, composed, but not fitting her idea of first class, was seated in such a space. The engines roared faintly as the plane began to prepare for pushback. The crew moved gracefully through their routines, checking belts, securing trays, offering polite smiles. Marcus adjusted slightly in his seat, stretching his long legs, still perfectly calm. Victoria shifted as well, but her expression revealed a different state of mind. She carried with her the certainty of being right, the habit of questioning anything that didn't match her expectations. And though Marcus remained silent, his presence alone seemed to challenge that certainty in ways she had never experienced before. The flight hadn't even taken off, but already, a story was beginning to unfold, one that neither of them could predict. As the plane taxied slowly toward the runway, Marcus settled into his seat, feeling the smooth vibration of the aircraft beneath him. He glanced briefly at the safety instructions card in the seat pocket and then returned his attention to the window, watching the tarmac blur past. He had flown countless flights before, many with the same calm demeanor, yet there was always a sense of anticipation. A professional never allowed themselves to be caught off guard, and Marcus's experience had taught him that observation was just as important as preparation. Victoria Hale, on the other hand, seemed unable to settle. Her fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a rhythmic tapping that mirrored the irritation building inside her. She had been told repeatedly that Marcus's presence in the seat was correct, yet her mind refused to accept it. Her life had been built around rules and expectations, and in her world, first class was a space reserved for certain types of people. To see someone who didn't match her assumptions seated beside her was, in her eyes, an injustice. She shifted her weight in the seat and leaned slightly toward the aisle, lowering her voice so only the flight attendant could hear. "I still think there's some kind of mistake," she said. "Can you double check? I don't understand why he's here." The flight attendant, maintaining her calm professionalism, responded with the same gentle tone she had used moments before. "Ma'am, the seat assignments are correct. He has a valid ticket for this seat. Everything is in order." Victoria's eyes narrowed, and she pursed her lips, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. She straightened her posture, crossed her legs, and opened her tablet, attempting to redirect her attention. Yet her glances toward Marcus kept returning, involuntarily drawn to him. He remained focused on his book, his expression neutral, almost serene. The calmness irritated her further. It was as though he wasn't even aware of the disturbance he had caused in her carefully constructed world. The passengers around them began to settle, some chatting quietly with companions, others adjusting their carry-on luggage. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering assistance where needed, checking seat belts, and ensuring comfort. The gentle hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady background sound that contrasted sharply with the tension building in row 2. Victoria decided to try another approach. "Are you sure he's not?" "I don't know, someone who's upgraded by mistake?" she asked, her voice still low, but carrying a hint of accusation. Marcus finally looked up from his book, meeting her gaze briefly before returning to his reading. His calm eyes held no anger, no resentment, only a quiet awareness. He didn't need to argue, his presence, the fact that he remained composed and unbothered, spoke louder than words ever could. Frustrated, Victoria turned back to the flight attendant. "I just think it's strange," she said. "I mean, look at him. He doesn't look like the kind of person who should be sitting here." Marcus's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of his book, but he didn't respond. He had learned long ago that people like Victoria often spoke from assumptions, not reality. Reacting would only escalate the situation. His role was to observe, to protect, and to remain invisible until the moment action was necessary. The flight attendants continued their duties, now moving toward the back of the plane. Victoria, feeling ignored, tapped her foot against the floor, her impatience growing. She whispered something under her breath, more to herself than anyone else, and glanced around to see if other passengers were noticing. A few did, some with curious eyes, some with polite indifference. But the subtle tension between her and Marcus seemed to radiate, filling the small space between them. Marcus, sensing the growing unease, adjusted slightly in his seat, closing his book for a moment. He observed her discreetly, noting her body language, her expressions, and the rising impatience. He understood the psychology of confrontation. People often escalated when they felt their expectations were challenged. His calm demeanor was designed to prevent exactly that kind of escalation. Victoria, however, was not deterred. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice again to the flight attendant. "I just don't feel comfortable. Is there someone else who can check?" she asked, her tone now tinged with annoyance. The flight attendant smiled politely. "I've already confirmed everything, ma'am. Everyone's seat is assigned correctly. Please take your seat, and we'll be happy to assist you with anything else during the flight." Victoria let out a soft sigh, placing her tablet on her lap, but her irritation didn't fade. She stared at Marcus, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't fully understand. Why was he so calm? Why didn't he respond? In her world, someone should have reacted, someone should have acknowledged her discomfort. The silence was infuriating. Marcus returned to his book, flipping the pages slowly. His training had taught him that observing without reacting was sometimes more powerful than speaking. He noticed every movement she made, every subtle shift in her tone, and mentally prepared for any potential escalation. Yet he remained outwardly relaxed, a picture of calm composure that seemed almost impossible given the tension beside him. Minutes passed, and the engines began to roar louder as the plane prepared for takeoff. Victoria shifted again, pulling out her phone and pretending to scroll through emails, though she wasn't truly focused on them. She shot Marcus another glance, as if daring him to speak, to acknowledge her discomfort. Marcus, sensing the moment, chose silence. He knew that confrontation, when unnecessary, could escalate quickly and draw unwanted attention. The passengers around them were settling, and he didn't want to cause a scene. His mission required subtlety, patience, and strategic observation. The flight attendants moved back down the aisle one final time before takeoff, checking that seat belts were fastened and that all passengers were ready. Victoria adjusted her scarf once more, sighing softly. She leaned back in her seat, her arms crossed, and gave Marcus one final scrutinizing look. For a moment, it seemed as though she might continue to press the issue, but she chose instead to sit silently, still simmering with frustration. Marcus, meanwhile, took a deep breath and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had flown countless flights in this very role, often facing situations where passengers challenged him for no reason other than their assumptions. He had learned that the best approach was always patience and observation. Reacting impulsively never served the mission, and his training had drilled this principle into him countless times. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane taxied onto the runway. Outside, the sun continued to rise, casting bright reflections on the metal wings. Marcus watched calmly as the runway stretched out ahead, a path that would soon carry them into the sky. He closed his book, resting it lightly on his lap, and prepared mentally for takeoff, while Victoria remained tense beside him, her thoughts consumed by irritation and disbelief. As the plane accelerated and lifted off the ground, the subtle vibration of the engines and the rising altitude added a sense of movement to the cabin. Marcus maintained his calm composure, while Victoria adjusted her seat, still glancing occasionally at him, as if expecting something extraordinary to happen. And in that quiet, tense atmosphere, a story was unfolding, a story of assumptions, composure, and hidden roles. Marcus remained an enigma to Victoria, a man whose calm presence challenged her expectations at every turn. The journey had only just begun, and the events that were about to unfold promised to be far more dramatic than either of them could have imagined. The plane had reached cruising altitude, the soft hum of the engines filling the cabin with a steady, almost soothing vibration. Outside the window, the sky stretched endlessly, painted in shades of blue with a few scattered clouds. To most passengers, the flight was calm and uneventful. Some were reading, others quietly chatting, and a few napped, lulled by the gentle sway of the aircraft. But in row 2, the tension had not eased. Victoria Hale sat upright, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on Marcus Bennett beside her. Her irritation had shifted from quiet annoyance to a simmering impatience she could no longer contain. Every calm gesture of Marcus seemed to inflame her further. He remained focused on his book, occasionally glancing out the window, entirely undisturbed by her scrutiny. She tapped her fingers on the armrest, faster this time, a rhythm of rising frustration. She leaned closer to the flight attendant, who had just passed by offering beverages. "I really think something is off," Victoria whispered, her voice tied with impatience. "I can't explain it, but I just don't feel comfortable with him sitting here. Can you do something?" The flight attendant, maintaining her polite and professional demeanor, shook her head gently. "Ma'am, all seats are correct. He is in his assigned seat, and everything is in order. Please try to relax, and enjoy the flight. If you need assistance, I will be happy to help in other ways." Victoria's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. The words were meant to calm her, but they had the opposite effect. In her mind, this man had somehow overstepped a boundary that she believed was hers to control. The sense of injustice she felt pulsed stronger with every second of silence from Marcus. She could not understand why he did not react to her apparent disapproval. Unable to contain her frustration any longer, Victoria leaned slightly toward him. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharper now, carrying a note of accusation. "Are you sure you're supposed to be sitting here? Because it doesn't seem right." Marcus looked up slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the briefest moment. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just a steady, calm awareness. He did not speak immediately. His training had taught him the power of silence. Sometimes, letting a situation unfold naturally, observing the other person's behavior, was far more effective than a verbal response. Victoria, interpreting his silence as arrogance or defiance, felt her blood boil. She straightened in her seat and leaned closer, lowering her voice but with unmistakable intensity. "I've flown first class many times," she said, her words carefully measured yet dripping with frustration. "I know who belongs here. And I know who doesn't. This doesn't belong to you." Marcus remained calm, his fingers resting lightly on his book. He had encountered similar confrontations before, and he knew that escalation often came from those who felt their expectations were being challenged. Reacting in anger or defensiveness could provoke chaos, something he always avoided when carrying out his duty. Instead, he chose observation and quiet patience. Victoria's irritation grew. She fumbled with her tablet, tapping the screen repeatedly without really reading anything. Each time Marcus adjusted his posture or turned a page, she interpreted it as mockery, though it was nothing more than ordinary behavior. Her thoughts raced. How could someone remain so composed in the face of what she perceived as disrespect? How could he not acknowledge her presence, her authority, her discomfort? Unable to resist any longer, Victoria's patience broke. She raised her voice slightly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I don't care what your ticket says." "This isn't right," she exclaimed. A few passengers turned their heads, eyebrows raised, sensing that a confrontation was brewing. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned slightly forward, curious to see what would happen next. The cabin, previously calm and peaceful, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Marcus closed his book slowly, resting it on his lap. His calmness had not wavered, but his awareness sharpened. He understood that this moment could escalate quickly if not handled carefully. The safety of the flight depended not just on his ability to respond, but also on maintaining order in the cabin until the proper moment. Victoria's frustration reached a peak. Her face flushed, her hands clenched lightly in her lap. She leaned forward and, without thinking, slapped Marcus lightly across the face, a gesture fueled by her anger and her belief in her own entitlement. The cabin fell silent. The slap, though not violent, echoed loudly in the quiet of first class. Passengers gasped, some instinctively covering their mouths, others freezing in disbelief. Victoria's eyes widened for a moment, as if the reality of what she had done shocked her. Marcus's reaction was immediate, though controlled. He did not strike back, did not yell. Instead, he calmly placed his hand over the area where she had struck him, his face composed, his expression neutral. In a quiet, authoritative voice, he said, "Ma'am, please stop." Victoria's words caught in her throat. She was stunned by his calmness, by the absence of anger or retaliation. Her plan to assert dominance had failed spectacularly. She stumbled over her own words, trying to justify her actions, but Marcus did not respond further. The flight attendants, noticing the disturbance, quickly moved toward the row. One gently but firmly intervened, placing a hand on Victoria's arm. "Ma'am, please remain calm. Everything is under control." Marcus, meanwhile, subtly signaled the crew. In a quiet, professional manner, he revealed his identification as an air marshal, showing the badge discreetly. The words carried weight instantly. The cabin's tension shifted dramatically. The passengers who had been silently watching now understood that this was no ordinary confrontation. Victoria's eyes went wide. Her anger drained away, replaced by shock and disbelief. She stammered, I didn't know. I thought." Marcus remained calm, his voice even and professional. "I am responsible for the safety of this flight, ma'am. Any interference or aggressive behavior can put everyone at risk." The flight attendants guided Victoria back into her seat, ensuring she was seated safely and away from further contact. Passengers whispered among themselves, some expressing relief, others silently judging her actions. The cabin, though still tense, began to return to a sense of order. Marcus, maintaining his calm, returned to his book, though his mind remained alert. He scanned the cabin subtly, noting the reactions of passengers, the positioning of crew members, and the general atmosphere. His role was not only to protect the flight but also to restore a sense of security among those around him. Victoria sat quietly now, her head lowered, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. She seemed to shrink in the seat, a stark contrast to the confidence she had displayed moments earlier. The reality of the situation, the knowledge that she had struck a trained air marshal, sank in fully, leaving her embarrassed and uneasy. Around them, passengers resumed their activities cautiously, some glancing toward Marcus with admiration, others shaking their heads at Victoria's behavior. The incident had become a quiet spectacle, a lesson in composure, professionalism, and the unexpected consequences of assumptions and entitlement. Marcus, sensing that the situation had stabilized, allowed himself to relax slightly, though his awareness never fully faded. He knew that even small actions in confined spaces could escalate, and he remained vigilant. Yet he also recognized the power of calm, controlled presence in diffusing conflict, a principle he had relied on countless times in his career. As the plane continued its journey through the clouds, the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the cabin. Marcus turned another page of his book, this time with the knowledge that the immediate tension had passed, and that the passengers around him were safe and secure. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into herself, a silent witness to the power of patience, professionalism, and respect. And in that moment, the dynamics of first class had shifted forever. The quiet drama between two individuals had revealed not only the hidden layers of responsibility carried by Marcus but also the profound impact of assumptions, pride, and composure. The story of the flight, still unfolding, had reached its most dramatic turning point, and yet the journey was far from over. The cabin, which had been tense moments ago, now held a quiet anticipation. Passengers whispered in low tones, exchanging curious glances, their eyes drawn to the row where the confrontation had just occurred. The hum of the engines, once a soothing background, now seemed almost secondary to the unfolding drama. Everyone sensed that something significant had happened, though they were not yet fully aware of the full story. Marcus Bennett, seated in his window seat, remained calm and composed. His hands rested gently on his book, but his mind was fully alert. He had discreetly signaled to the flight attendants when the slap occurred, and they had responded immediately, attempting to manage the situation without alarming the other passengers. But Marcus knew that the next step was critical. The moment demanded clarity and authority, and it was time to reveal the truth to ensure safety and restore order. He took a deep breath, closing his book with a soft thud. The motion drew Victoria's attention. Her eyes, wide with shock and lingering disbelief, followed every movement. Marcus looked directly at her, not with anger, not with accusation, but with quiet authority. In a steady voice, he said, "Ma'am, I am an air marshal. My responsibility is the safety and security of everyone on this flight." A stunned silence filled the cabin. Passengers froze mid-motion, some holding coffee cups, others leaning forward in their seats. The revelation carried weight. Marcus's calm demeanor, combined with the authoritative tone of his words, immediately shifted the energy in the room. People who had been mere spectators now understood the seriousness of what had just transpired. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she placed them on her lap. She blinked, struggling to process what she had just heard. Her mind raced. She had assumed control of a situation based on her perception, only to discover that she had misjudged entirely. She looked down, feeling a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning awareness of the consequences of her actions. The flight attendants moved closer, ensuring Victoria remained seated and calm. One spoke softly, her tone firm but reassuring. "Ma'am, please stay seated. The situation is under control. You will have the opportunity to explain your actions after we land." Marcus, sensing the need to restore calm, addressed the cabin more broadly. "Everyone, please remain seated and secure. The situation has been handled, and there is no further threat. I ask for your cooperation as we continue the flight safely." A few passengers whispered among themselves, nodding in understanding. Some glanced at Victoria, who had withdrawn into herself, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Her eyes were wide, her lips pressed together, and her posture rigid. The contrast between her earlier confidence and her current vulnerability was striking. Marcus continued to observe, ensuring that no additional tension arose. He knew that while the immediate danger had passed, the emotional impact on passengers could linger if not managed carefully. He allowed himself a brief, subtle exhale, signaling to the crew that the situation was stabilizing. Victoria's voice, when it finally emerged, was quiet, almost a whisper. I didn't know. I thought." She struggled to finish the sentence, words catching in her throat. Her tone was a mixture of apology and disbelief, though she did not yet fully grasp the gravity of what she had done. Marcus responded calmly, his voice measured. "Ma'am, any aggressive behavior on a flight is taken very seriously. It could endanger yourself and others. Please understand the importance of respecting the rules and the safety measures in place." Victoria lowered her gaze completely, her cheeks flushing slightly. She seemed to shrink in her seat, realizing the weight of her actions. She had assumed authority without understanding the full context, and the revelation of Marcus's identity had humbled her in a way that mere words could not. Around the cabin, passengers began to relax, though the atmosphere remained attentive. People resumed their activities slowly. Some continued reading, others quietly adjusted their belongings, but the incident had left an indelible impression. The story of the confrontation and Marcus's calm authority was already being quietly discussed in whispers. The flight attendants, having ensured that Victoria was calm, returned to their duties with quiet professionalism. They moved down the aisle, offering beverages and checking on passengers, all the while maintaining the smooth operation of the cabin. Their movements were careful and deliberate, ensuring that no further tension arose. Marcus returned his attention to his book, but his eyes occasionally scanned the cabin. Observation was a critical part of his duty. Even after the revelation, his role required vigilance. He noted the positions of passengers, the reactions of those nearby, and the subtle cues of potential discomfort or concern. His calm presence was a stabilizing force, one that reassured both passengers and crew alike. Victoria, seated beside him, finally raised her eyes slightly. She glanced at Marcus, her expression a mix of apology, humility, and lingering shock. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it, unsure of what to say. Words seemed inadequate to convey the depth of her realization. She had misjudged the situation entirely, and the consequences of her assumptions were now clear. A young passenger seated across the aisle leaned slightly toward their companion, whispering, "Did you see that? He's an air marshal. I can't believe she did that." The companion nodded, eyes wide, clearly impressed by Marcus's calm handling of the situation. The murmurs spread quietly through the cabin, a mixture of astonishment and respect. The captain's voice then came over the intercom, calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing our flight without incident. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We appreciate your cooperation and understanding." The announcement further reassured the passengers, and a sense of normalcy began to return. Yet the incident had left a mark, an unforgettable lesson in humility, patience, and the unexpected layers of responsibility carried by those trained to protect others. Marcus, now fully focused on observation, continued to watch the cabin discreetly. He noted Victoria's posture, the reactions of nearby passengers, and the overall mood. He understood that the situation was delicate, and that the next several hours required both vigilance and subtle management. His calm demeanor, combined with professional authority, was the key to maintaining order. Victoria finally spoke, her voice small but sincere. I apologize. I didn't understand. I didn't know who you were. I was wrong." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without expressing anger or satisfaction. "Thank you. Please remember, safety is everyone's responsibility on a flight. Cooperation and respect are critical." Victoria lowered her gaze once more, her mind racing with reflection. She had learned a powerful lesson not only about assumptions and entitlement but also about the quiet strength of composure, professionalism, and responsibility. The passengers, now settling back into their seats, began to engage in quieter activities. Some read books or magazines, others adjusted their screens or reclined slightly. The cabin, once tense, now carried a calm awareness, a subtle acknowledgement of the incident and the authority Marcus represented. As the flight continued through the clouds, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft reflections across the seats. Marcus opened his book again, but his vigilance never wavered. Every glance, every subtle movement in the cabin was noted and analyzed. His presence was both protective and reassuring, a silent guarantee of safety for all on board. Victoria, still seated beside him, seemed lost in thought. Her posture remained tense but introspective. She had witnessed a quiet demonstration of authority and calm that far exceeded her expectations. The experience had humbled her, reshaping her understanding of control, power, and respect. The hours passed, the flight moving steadily toward its destination. Marcus maintained his calm presence, observing, ensuring, and subtly guiding the atmosphere of the cabin. The passengers, now fully aware of the events, carried a mixture of awe, respect, and relief. And in that moment, the story of the flight of confrontation, revelation, and quiet authority had reached a pivotal point. Marcus's professionalism had transformed a potentially dangerous situation into a lesson in calm composure and the importance of understanding before judgment. The cabin, though still carrying echoes of tension, now held a sense of order and awareness that would linger long after the journey ended. The plane began its gradual descent, the soft rumble of the engines changing pitch as the aircraft lowered altitude. Outside the windows, the clouds thinned, revealing the city below, sprawling with streets, buildings, and tiny vehicles moving like ants. The sunlight reflected off windows and rooftops, creating a shimmering landscape that seemed almost unreal from above. Inside the cabin, passengers prepared for landing, adjusting their seat backs, securing their belongings, and fastening seat belts as the flight attendants moved through the aisles with calm efficiency. Marcus Bennett remained seated, his posture relaxed yet alert. His calm presence had been a stabilizing force throughout the flight, particularly after the tense confrontation with Victoria Hale. Though the incident was now behind him, Marcus remained attentive, observing the passengers, their movements, and their subtle reactions. As an air marshal, he knew that the moments before landing could still hold surprises, and that his role was not over until the aircraft safely touched down and all passengers had disembarked without incident. Victoria sat beside him, her demeanor transformed from the arrogance and frustration of earlier hours to a quiet introspection. She adjusted her scarf nervously, glancing around the cabin as if seeking reassurance from the passengers who had witnessed the incident. Some of them gave her polite nods or soft smiles, subtle gestures that communicated acknowledgement rather than judgment. Victoria's cheeks were flushed, a mix of embarrassment and reflection, as she silently replayed the events in her mind. The flight attendants passed by once more, performing final checks before landing. One approached Victoria gently, speaking in a calm and professional voice. "Ma'am, thank you for remaining seated and cooperative. Once we land, the captain will assist in coordinating the next steps. Please stay seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." Victoria nodded quietly, her hands clasped together on her lap. She was aware that her actions would have consequences, and she could feel the weight of her misjudgment pressing upon her. The realization of what had occurred, the slap, the confrontation, and Marcus's revealing of his air marshal status, was something she could not undo. Yet, in that moment, she also began to understand the gravity of her behavior and the importance of composure, humility, and respect for others. Passengers around them continued to prepare for landing. Some adjusted their screens, others read quietly, and a few whispered softly about the earlier confrontation. There was an air of subdued curiosity, as though everyone on the flight had learned an unspoken lesson about assumptions, patience, and the hidden responsibilities carried by those in authority. Marcus, noticing these subtle interactions, allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction, not in any personal pride, but in knowing that his calm professionalism had maintained order and kept the flight safe. The plane's wheels met the runway with a gentle thud, and the aircraft rolled smoothly along the tarmac. The engines roared softly, gradually slowing as the plane taxied toward the gate. Outside, ground crew moved with precision, guiding the aircraft safely to its designated parking position. Inside, passengers exhaled in relief, some stretching their legs, others quietly murmuring to their companions. The tension of the flight had dissipated, replaced by a sense of safety and reflection. Once the plane came to a complete stop, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your destination. Please remain seated until the seat belt sign is turned off. Thank you for your cooperation, and we hope you had a safe and comfortable flight." Marcus remained seated, observing the cabin as passengers prepared to disembark. His calm presence continued to reassure those around him. Victoria, still seated beside him, took a deep breath, her mind filled with a mixture of regret and newfound understanding. She had witnessed firsthand the quiet authority and composed professionalism that Marcus had maintained throughout the ordeal, and it left a lasting impression. As the seatbelt sign turned off, the passengers began to gather their belongings and stand in line for deboarding. Flight attendants assisted with luggage and provided guidance, ensuring the process was orderly. Victoria hesitated for a moment, glancing at Marcus, who remained seated, calm and focused. She felt compelled to speak, to acknowledge her mistake and express her sincere apology. "Mr. Bennett," she began softly, her voice slightly trembling. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze. She continued, "I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. I misjudged you completely, and I can see now how wrong I was. I am truly sorry." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging her words with quiet professionalism. "Thank you. It's important to understand that actions, even when unintentional, can have consequences. Safety and respect are priorities for everyone on a flight." Victoria lowered her gaze, a mix of humility and reflection evident in her expression. She realized that the incident had not only taught her a personal lesson but had also highlighted a broader truth about judgment, assumptions, and the importance of patience and observation. She would carry this lesson forward, a quiet reminder of the power of composure and understanding in unexpected situations. Outside, the passengers disembarked in orderly fashion, some pausing briefly to exchange polite words or nods of acknowledgement with the crew. The experience of the flight lingered in their minds, not as a tale of conflict, but as a demonstration of professionalism, calm authority, and the unseen responsibilities of those who ensure safety in the skies. Marcus stood quietly as passengers passed, observing that everyone seemed composed and grateful, a reflection of the peaceful resolution achieved. Victoria, still processing her experience, followed behind, moving with a mixture of hesitation and reflection. She was acutely aware of the impression she had made, and the humility she felt weighed heavily upon her. She recognized the importance of understanding the full context of any situation before reacting and the value of patience, composure, and respect for others, regardless of appearance or assumption. Once on the tarmac, ground personnel guided the passengers toward the terminal. The city below stretched wide, alive with movement and energy, yet for Victoria, the world felt different. The confrontation and revelation aboard the flight had shifted her perspective, leaving her more mindful of her actions and their potential impact. Marcus remained composed, maintaining a professional demeanor as he observed the terminal activity. He knew his duty was not yet complete. He would continue to ensure security until all passengers were safely delivered to the gate and the crew had concluded their responsibilities. Yet he also allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, recognizing that his calm and composed handling of the situation had prevented escalation and ensured safety. In the terminal, Victoria paused for a moment, reflecting on the events. The embarrassment of her earlier behavior was tempered by a newfound understanding of humility and respect. She realized that assumptions could lead to conflict and that true authority often lay in calmness, observation, and professionalism rather than dominance or entitlement. Passengers moved past, many sharing quiet conversations about the flight. Some expressed admiration for Marcus's composure, noting the subtle strength and confidence that had maintained order without confrontation. Others reflected on the lessons learned from the incident, recognizing the importance of patience and understanding in moments of tension. Victoria, now alone for a moment, took a deep breath and silently resolved to carry the lesson forward. She understood that respect and humility were more valuable than pride or assumption, and that true composure came from careful observation, patience, and a commitment to understanding before judgment. The experience aboard the flight had been a profound reminder of these truths. Marcus, observing from a short distance, remained professional and vigilant. His calm demeanor and quiet authority had transformed a potentially disruptive situation into a lesson in safety, respect, and composure. The passengers' reactions, though subtle, reflected the impact of his presence and professionalism. The flight, once tense and uncertain, had ended in an example of how patience, understanding, and quiet strength could prevent conflict and ensure safety. As Victoria exited the terminal, she glanced back at the aircraft, her thoughts filled with reflection. She realized that the incident had changed her perspective in ways she had not anticipated. The lessons of humility, composure, and the importance of respecting others' roles and responsibilities would remain with her long after the memory of the flight had faded. Marcus, returning to his routine duties, remained aware of the responsibility he carried. The passengers' safety, the crew's well-being, and the smooth operation of the flight were his priorities. Yet he also recognized that the incident had left an indelible impression, a reminder of the power of calm authority, observation, and professionalism in transforming a tense situation into an opportunity for learning and reflection. By the time the terminal had cleared, the story of the flight had already begun to take shape in the minds of those who had witnessed it. It was no longer a tale of confrontation or frustration, but a story of calm, composed authority, the unseen responsibilities of those who ensure safety, and the profound lessons that could emerge from moments of tension. Victoria, walking away from the terminal, carried with her the memory of the flight, a quiet reminder of the importance of humility, respect, and understanding. The incident had changed her not through punishment, but through reflection, insight, and the demonstration of professionalism and composure by Marcus Bennett. And as the city moved around them, busy and alive, the story of the flight remained a lesson in the power of calm, patience, and the subtle, quiet strength that often goes unseen, yet shapes the safety, order, and respect that define human interactions in moments of challenge.